Okay.
My name is Eva Libitzky. I am a Holocaust survivor. I'm going to speak to you about the darkest days in history when the worst atrocities and genocide was performed in modern times to the human race. The darkest day and the darkest days in my life. I might get emotional at times, but after all these years, the pain is still there. It never goes away. This is my history. I was born Chava Gerst in the town of Lodz in February 28, 1924. Lodz was the second largest city in Poland. Lodz had about 300,000 Jews. Lodz was mainly an industrial city, but anti-Semitism in Poland was always present. Schools were segregated. We always lived with certain amount of fear, not to be attacked because we were Jews. Nevertheless, life was good. We had families which were very close. We all lived in the same area and were very close. Family life was wonderful. I was pampered, protected, and very loved. I had parents, grandparents, a brother, lots of cousins, uncles, and aunts. But on September 3rd, 1939, all this came to an end. Our world and our lives changed drastically. I was 15 years old then. The German Wehrmacht marched into Lodz, and our nightmare began. The SS troops, they robbed us, humiliated us, took out our men, tortured them, and forced them into hard labor, while terrorizing the women. And our wonderful Polish neighbors, who we thought were our best friends, helped the Nazis identify who was the Jew and helped rob our possessions. We had to wear yellow stars in front and back, and a curfew was enforced on every Jew. We lived in constant fear behind bolted and locked doors. My parents were very religious. They lived only for God, Torah, and tzedakah. We lived in a nice part of town and owned a nice apartment. I had a brother who was 6 years older. He was a student of yeshiva. I too had a very broad Hebrew education. I was the youngest in my family, so I was loved, protected, and life was wonderful for me before the nightmare began. But by November 1939, we were ordered to leave our homes and possessions. We could only take what we could carry. We were ordered to walk to the other end of town. It was the worst and poorest part of town where the ghetto was formed. The Poles were resettled to our nice homes, and we were given their run-down shacks where there was no water, no running water, no toilets, just run-down shacks. Since we were the first to be evacuated from our homes, we were lucky to get one room for my parents, my grandfather, my brother, and I. We were able to take some of our clothes, and many of my mothers were able to smuggle out some of her jewelry, which we at the beginning of our lives, because we could trade it for food. By the beginning of 1940, the ghetto was closed. With barbed wire, Jews were not permitted to cross the street, so they were built big bridges installed in order to cross the street. And if anybody came close to the wires, was shot immediately. Approximately 445,000 people from Poland and Czechoslovakia, Germany, and other surrounded countries were packed into the small area, stuffed in the small area, which was about maybe less than 1 mile in diameter. About 9 people were given one room. Everybody was assigned to work. We had to work for the Germans because the ghetto was self-governed. We had our own police, fire department, and had an oldest. His name was Romkowski. He took orders from the Germans, from the Gestapo. Everybody had to work from very young to very old in order to get food rations, which were cards. The rations were hardly enough to survive. 300 calories per person. The rations were distributed once a week, every second week. A quarter of a loaf of bread for a whole week, a little flour, 3 decagram of sugar, occasionally a potato or a beet, 3 decagram of turnip, and burnt oats, which we made coffee. From those grounds we made coffee, made patties. It was so bitter, but it helped the hunger. One had to be very strong to resist and divide this measly ration a little bit at each day. We were so very hungry all the time, it was very hard to resist. Some people couldn't resist and ate it all at one time, and by the end of the month they were dead. The hunger was indescribable. People were eating anything in sight to survive. You could find a speck of grass, a bird, a cat, or a dog in the ghetto. Everything was eaten. I myself picked some grass and certain leaves and made soup out of it. My father sold my mother's diamond ring for a loaf of bread because material things meant nothing, but bread meant survival and hope to outlive this hell. People were lying on the sidewalk with their eyes open, lifeless, dying from hunger and from malnutrition. This terrible sight I'll never forget as long as I will live. We walked over dead bodies, just praying that tomorrow it won't be me. For months during the winter, we slept fully clothed because it was so cold and nothing to warm up. Every piece of wood, every part of the floor was ripped out and burned just to warm up a little bit. Sickness of typhus fever, dysentery, and TB hit almost every home. I was sick with typhoid fever, dysentery, and pneumonia. There was no medicine, but I survived by a miracle beyond my imagination. It must have meant for me to live. We lived in such dirt, sleeping constantly fully dressed to keep warm. The lice were eating us alive. You can't imagine the size of them. If you took a piece of cloth off, it could walk by itself. The Germans were trying systematically to eliminate the ghetto. First they came with trucks to the hospital. They were sick, and children, mothers who just gave birth to babies, they grabbed everyone and threw them out through the windows into the trucks with such cruelty. Then they came an order to the elders to deliver 1,000 children. Which parents would willingly give up their child? People became panicky and hid their children, so they didn't get their food ration and died from hunger anyway. People were hiding corpses so they could use their ration cards a little bit longer. It was such a desperation for survival. Very often there was a raid. The SS marched unexpected to the ghetto and took the children and older people and anyone else at random. Since we had absolutely no outside news and had no idea what the horror of death camps, so some people went voluntarily, thinking they are going to work in another ghetto and they won't be able to get some more food. They didn't know. Instead, they went to their camp, to their death. I constantly feared for my parents, and I hid them. We had a dirt cellar in the floor, and most of the time they were there in hiding. My brother was taken away in one of these raids, and I never saw him again. He was only 22 years old. My mother could hardly walk. Her bones were disintegrating from malnutrition. My father was getting weaker and weaker, and he was becoming so frail. He was only 48 years old, and he was dying from hunger. I saw him disintegrating, and there was nothing I could do. My father was trading his measly ration for some medicine for me while I was in coma from typhoid fever. He gave his life for me, and I will never forget this. One day when I came home from work, I found him dead. At this time, I felt had no purpose to live or fight. I adored my father. He was my strength. And I became very angry at God, and I asked why. But there was no answer. I was able to give him a decent burial on the Jewish cemetery. At this time, I was giving up my fight to live. But there was my mother, who needed me. My mother worked in a place where she was ripping clothes into strips and was making braided rugs for the Germans. Truckloads of clothing was coming into those factories. And they were wondering where all these clothes came from. We had no idea, no outside news. We were completely isolated from the outside world. Later, we found out that this clothes was coming from all the dead people, from the dead bodies from the concentration camps. By the summer of 1944, they started liquidating the ghetto. Homes were raided, street by street. At night, and people were taken out. I was afraid of the unknown, since there was no news from the people that were taken away. So I decided to hide. I found an attic where I used to work. So my friend, her mother, and my mother, and we decided to hide, hoping this nightmare will end soon. It was midsummer and unbearable hot. There were no windows in that attic for air. At night, I came out and looked for some scraps of food or water. I could hardly find anything. And our mothers were getting weaker and weaker, so we decided to come out from the hiding, and whatever will happen, will happen. Immediately, we were surrounded by the police, by the Jewish police. We were taken to a railway station where were hundreds of people, Czech, Hungarian, German, Polish, all Jews, waiting for their turn to be shoved into those cattle cars. Our turn came to be shoved in. There were 100 people in one car, fighting for air, going to the unknown. There were men, women, and children together with one pail in the middle of the car to relieve themselves. We felt lower than animals. My mother was lying on the floor crying for some water, and I felt so helpless because there was nothing I could give her. I held her in my lap and begged her to hold on. That was the last time I ever held my mother. Finally, we arrived at the destination. It was Auschwitz-Birkenau. The shocking impression of this place is indescribable. I thought I came to an asylum, to a crazy place, to an asylum. I wished I had died in the ghetto in that attic and not come to this horrible place. There stood Dr. Mengele, who was known as the Angel of Death, with all his cronies and dogs and his whips shouting, "Raus, raus," meaning out, out. They separated us from men, from women, children from mothers. My mother was shoved to the right, I was shoved to the left, and I never saw her again. I was dealized and shaved my head, and was stripped of my clothes, my pride, my dignity. My mother, with thousands others, with children, were ordered to undress and were taken to a cold shower, when instead of water, a cyclone poison was coming coming. This was a slow, choking death. And the screams and choking people must have been heard in every corner of the world. The bodies were burned in the crematorium while the chimney smoked, and the stench was unbearable, unbearable. And the whole world stood still. I, with a group of other young women, was marched to a barn where 1,000 women were ordered to lay on a dirty, muddy ground, stuffed like sardines, just waiting for my turn to this crematorium, in impossible conditions. Then came the black elder and announced, "This is not a resort you came to. This only will, is way out. Only way out from here is through the chimney, and if you don't like that, you can hang yourself on the electric wire. Jews will live only 2 weeks, others 4 to 6 weeks." I felt numb and resigned. No one could live in such horrible conditions. It's impossible. I was just waiting for my turn to the crematorium. 20,000 people were gassed and cremated daily. The screams of the people from the gas chambers and the stench of the burning flesh must be felt in every corner of the world. And the whole world stood still. I lived 2 months in these horrible conditions, with just 1 watery soup a day. And miraculously, I survived. By then, German factories were desperate for workers in ammunition factories. So they came and picked out 200 women who were still looking more or less capable of work. I was one of them. It was late in November. Polish winters are known as very cold, and was snowing. There was snowing and icing, and I had no shoes, barefoot, with just a little torn blouse, which only covered the front, nothing else. And I had to walk for miles in the snow and the ice to the railroad station, which would take us to Germany, to the factories. The cold took my breath away. It was unbearable. My feet were frostbitten, my hands were frostbitten. I knew if I stopped, I'll be shot. I didn't care anymore. I wanted to die. But the concentration camp we had a style, everything was done in 5. We slept in 5. We went once a day to the outhouses in 5, and stayed for endless hours 3 times a day, counted in 5s. So the 5 developed a friendship and support for one another. The motto was, "One for all and all for one." And they wouldn't let me die. They picked me up, warmed me with their bodies, and gave me courage to go on. And I made it to the train. By then, everybody got sick with diarrhea from cold. We were transported to Germany, to a city called Dresden. I was given a garment. One of those garments was painted, on all the garments was painted a big cross, which illuminated at night. But I was lucky. I was lucky that I had a big garment, and I could tear out pieces and make head coverings and whatever to cover me, which covered me better. I had no name. In front of my garment was a number. This was my name. I worked in a factory drilling holes in bombs. There were no electric, by hand. There were no electric machines in those days. We worked, it was a very, very hard work drilling those holes in the bombs, which later were sent to powder factories to fill for powder. Those bombs were made for the V-1 planes. I worked 14 to 16 hours a day. By the end of the day, I got a soup and a slice of bread. By April 1944, the Allies bombed was all around us. We saw the fires, and there came a hope that this living hell is coming to an end. And we did not care whether we will be bombed out, that we will get killed. But we knew that this hell is coming to an end. But the Nazis did not want any survivors to be able to tell the world the story, what happened, and those horrors and atrocities, and the civilized men could do to a man. They loaded us on open trains, trying to dispose of us of any crematorium that's still there. 70 women were stuffed in each coal wagon, open coal wagon, with only rain to drink. 3 weeks we were going back and forth because there was no place where they could get us off. They were surrounded all around, and there was no crematorium that they could let us off. We passed farms and crying, please, for food, crying, please give us food. The farmers felt sorry for us and threw a beet, a potato, or a carrot, and we were all fighting like animals to get to it. Finally, they took us to Theresienstadt. They found out there is one crematorium still in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. By then the Red Cross got there and put hospitals and tents, put hospital tents. By then most of the people came, the transports, they took us to crematorium to Czechoslovakia. By then most of the people were dead, piled up dead bodies. But the Red Cross came in earlier and put up tents, medical tents for all those sick people. Some people made it till most of the people were sick with dysentery, typhus, diarrhea. I weighed about 65 pounds, but I survived. Many didn't make it. They died in the hospital. Many died right there when they came to the hospital. They died already. They came alive and they died there. To this day, I keep asking myself, how is it possible? How is it possible for me to survive? It's not possible for a human being to endure so much and survive and not come out sane. It's impossible. It's beyond my comprehension. I guess it was beshared for me to live, and meant for me to live. I was 6 weeks in this hospital, and I survived. We were in quarantine, and we could not get out. 6 weeks after the war, I was still behind the wires in quarantine. Through all these years, horror and hunger, I dreamt to be free and be able to sit at the table and have a loaf of bread and be able to eat and eat and eat. And when this time came and I had this loaf of bread and I ate, the realization hit me. What am I going to do? I'm here in this world all alone. Where do I go? What do I do? Why did I survive? I don't know where to turn. My whole family was killed. Till recently, I was living constantly with a feeling of guilt. Why am I here? Why my whole family was dead, died, and I am here? I felt the guilt. My father's family name completely disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore. Even after I married, I had my children, terrible void was always there. I had no closure. But in 1990, my children insisted to go to Poland to find the roots. I refused at first. It was too painful, and I felt that every stone in Poland is soaked with Jewish blood. It was impossible for me to go there, but eventually I gave in. After going to Poland with my children, I realized why I am here. I am the only one link from a whole chain. There is now a Moishele, a Hanele, a Shloimele, a Ruchele, a Itele. They are the continuation of that chain. And then I realized why I'm here. The sad part is that I was deprived of gathering, the joy of gathering of grandparents, gathering of family events. They always ask why. Until we went back to Poland, I couldn't and I wouldn't talk about it. This terrible tragedy. About this terrible tragedy to my family. It is impossible for anyone to imagine the enormity of this great tragedy. If I try to think of it, I myself cannot believe that all this horror happened to me and I was able to endure all this and come out sane. So how can you or anyone imagine and visualize all this? It is impossible. So I kept quiet. I could only talk to other survivors because they knew the pain and they understood. But I came to realize that with each year there is less and less survivors. We are dying out. And we are no longer, and the story must be told, no matter how painful it is. What happened to our Jewish people, to our great European Jewish culture? It all disappeared. 6 million Jews included 1.5 million children and 5 million other nationalities that were considered undesirable and unfit to the Aryan nation were murdered in cold blood. It had to be told and taught to the children of the future generation, that hatred, prejudice, and genocide is destructive. You, and I talk to the kids, I say, you are the future generation. You are the future. I tell them you are the future generation. And and you are going to be leaders in this wonderful country. Don't stay deaf and mute. When you see injustice, speak up. Let your voices be heard. So in 1998, I agreed to go. You want to know this? I agreed to go with the March of the Living. You want to hear this too? Several thousand teenagers, 2,000 just from Florida, 7,000 from all over the world, went on the March of the Living so they can see and visualize what happened to our people. We went to Poland and to all those horrible places where our people were brutally murdered and gassed. I showed them the living hell from which I came. And I shared all with them because I am the living proof of what happened. What they saw, they'll never forget, and neither will I. It has been several years since I went on the march. I still have bad dreams about Treblinka, Majdanek, Auschwitz, and the pit of them all, Birkenau. This trip took a toll on me. It was harder than I ever imagined it would be. But I feel that my present was a gift to all those kids, since I am the living proof, and this was worthwhile. This tragedy can't be forgotten, and they are the future generation to carry on the memory. Then when we marched the 2 miles from Auschwitz to Birkenau, 7,000 teenagers from all over the world in our blue jackets, carrying American and Israeli flags, with our heads high, proud of our heritage. All we can think, Hitler, turn a new grave. You did not succeed. We are here. We will remember. It's not easy for me to talk about the Holocaust. It is very painful. But as time passes, survivors grow older and die. Who is going to remember what happened? It should be you, the future generation, to remember and teach the future generation about the Holocaust. It is only through the memorials and the reminders that this memorial will remain alive. As long as we'll never forget, it will never happen again. Zachor. So this is how I speak to the children. I was a little nervous. Speaking, makes me a little nervous and emotional.
That's it.
Huh?
You're done.